And here we are with part 2 of 10 need-to-knows about protecting your intellectual property. You have to recognize that parallel development happens. In other words, two people may come up quite independently with similar games. This has even happened to Reiner Knizia, Quirkle. Much more often, two games use some similar ideas. And whether somebody thinks one game is a ripoff of another game will vary greatly in what they think similar ideas amount to. But you have to keep track of this. There are tens of thousands of tabletop games and hundreds of thousands of video games. Of course, lots of them use similar ideas. But remember, ideas cannot be protected. Ideas aren't even protected by patents. Only a particular expression of an idea is protected by a patent. So even if somebody does use a game with the same ideas as yours, practically speaking, you don't have a leg to stand on, and you'll be wasting your money with a lawsuit. Now, this doesn't prevent people from starting lawsuits where they're just going to waste their money. Now, when you work for someone else as a designer or any creative job, you probably won't own the IP even if you create it, because they're paying you. And they want the benefit of what you have done because they're paying you. Many video game companies try to go further. They specify that anything you create while you work for them, even on your own time, at home, is still their property. They do this to be sure you have no incentive to work on your own ideas on their time. And you might be able to negotiate so that this is not part of the contract, but that's pretty much the standard. Also, if you create something as a work for hire, you're selling all the rights. I stopped writing for Dragon magazine 30-some years ago when they began to demand all rights to what I wrote. I had been selling them first world serial rights, which means they had the right to print it in a magazine, and that was it. So I can and will reprint all of my Dragon material because I only sold the first world serial rights. Using someone else's IP, intellectual property, is a big can of worms, even if you're licensed to do it. You certainly don't want to do it if you're not licensed. Even if you can say you're not making a cent, you're still going to be in the wrong. You're still breaking the law. You can't use a story, a novel, a film originated by someone else without a license. Now, history itself is fair game, and you occasionally run into some nut who thinks that because they've made a game about Albert Einstein, nobody else can make a game about Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein is part of history. Now, as an example, even though Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom novels are far out of copyright, he died in 1950, Disney had to deal with ERB Incorporated because some of the terms were still under trademark, such as John Carter and Barsoom, when they made the movie John Carter. As I said, trademark is often the best protection. Now, when you do have a license, you're often under many additional constraints. The people you're licensing from may want to approve everything you do and can easily say, no go, and you have no recourse. Is it worth your effort to put yourself under these constraints? Moreover, unless you can show that you'll sell lots of games, it probably isn't worth the IP owner's time and effort. If you could only sell a few thousand copies of whatever it is you're licensing for, that's not enough money for them to bother with all the legal hassles and certain negotiation and so on. It's just not worth it. One reason why there are hundreds of Tolkien games is that Professor Tolkien sold all those rights that ended up in the hands of Sophisticated Games in England, and it's worth Sophisticated Games' efforts to license for only a few thousand copies to something because they're a relatively small company. Trade secrets rarely come into play. Trade secrets usually involve corporations, most likely big ones. They come into play when an employee leaves one corporation for another, and then, according to the people he's left, or she, they give some of the information that was proprietary to the first company to the second company. That is, they take confidential information with them. Now, this almost never applies to the game industry, and when it does, it's usually video game studios. The last thing here is that there's little you can do about piracy. In tabletop game world, every copy of a game costs additional money to make. In anything that's digital, where it's just electrons, whether it's video games or electronic books, you can copy something at no cost and quite quickly. And consequently, that's easy to pirate. My book, Game Design, when it became available in electronic versions, suddenly appeared on the torrents. And there were more copies downloaded on the torrents that have sold in all the years since. How many people read that? Who knows? How many of those people would have bought a copy? Who knows? But what I know is there's more pirated copies than there are legal copies. Now, if you're going to sell something of this sort, you might consider Kickstarter, where you can sell a lot up front before piracy is an issue. If you get the money up front, then the pirates can't take that away from you. Of course, so much piracy originates overseas or outside your country, whatever country you live in, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, I've discussed some of these topics in my learning game design courses, audiovisual courses online, and at some point I'll probably make a course just about IP and protecting IP. And to get more information about courses, current and future, my website, pulseforgames.com. Thanks for listening.